We're back for another episode Behind the Walls with your girl Anna B. Welcome everybody and thank you for joining me. Shout out to those who've made a request for this video. Thank you to all of my friends worldwide watching. Let's get into it. Patricia Blackmon was convicted of capital murder for the beating death of her 28-month-old daughter, Dominiqua. Sentenced to death on July 19, 2002, she was transferred to Julia Tutwiler Prison on August 5th. She is currently the longest serving of the 5 women on Alabama's death row. On May 29, 1999, Patricia called 911 to her mobile home in Dothan, telling the 911 operator that her daughter was not breathing. Paramedics arrived at Patricia's around 9:30 p.m., finding Dominiqua lying on the master bedroom floor, wearing only a diaper and blood-soaked socks. She was covered in vomit, and as Patricia reported, she was not breathing. Paramedics attempted to revive Dominiqua before transporting her to Flowers Hospital. Dr. Christie testified to treating Dominiqua when she was brought into the emergency room. He was able to establish an airway, but unfortunately at 10:22 p.m., he pronounced the 2-year-old dead. Dominiqua was observed with multiple bruises and contusions. There was an hematoma on her forehead, blood on her chest, as well as an imprint of the sole of a shoe. The results of Dominiqua's autopsy showed she died from multiple blunt force injuries to her head, chest, abdomen, and extremities, detailing 30 injuries on her little body. The sandals Patricia was wearing on the day that Dominiqua passed away were compared with the scanned image from her chest by Chief Medical Examiner Dr. James Downs. It was his opinion that the imprint on Dominiqua's chest was consistent with the sole of the sandals Patricia was wearing. Testimony presented at Patricia's 2002 capital murder trial showed that she adopted Dominiqua approximately 9 months before she died. Testimony also showed that Patricia was the only one with Dominiqua from the time they were last seen earlier in the evening up until Dominiqua's death. Patricia's father-in-law testified that on the night Dominiqua was killed, he saw Dominiqua and she was playing and acting normal. She and Patricia left his house at around 8 p.m. Patricia's mobile home was searched. There were several blood-splattered items found. Forensic tests revealed the presence of blood on a broken pool cue, a child's t-shirt, a pink flatbed sheet, a quilt, and 2 napkins. It was Dominiqua's blood. Several witnesses were called to testify in Patricia's defense. An employee of the Department of Human Resources said that she had contact with the mother and daughter once a month for 5 months before August of 1998, and that she noticed that the two had a good relationship. There was also a neighbor to testify that she frequently left her children with Patricia. After presentation of all evidence and testimony, the jury found Patricia guilty. The court moved to the penalty phase, and the jury, by a vote of 10-2, recommended that Patricia be sentenced to death. The state followed the jury's recommendation, relying on the aggravating circumstances that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. An appeal, which is automatic in a case involving the death penalty, followed. Patricia's argument was that her crime was not deserving of the death penalty because she believed her daughter was knocked unconscious before being beaten, and so therefore her crime was not heinous or cruel. Patricia's request for a rehearing was overruled and her appeal denied. In 2013, Patricia and her new attorneys hoped the judge that presided over her 2002 trial would reconsider, arguing that Patricia's attorneys failed to perform an adequate investigation, failed to challenge evidence, did not contact crucial witnesses, and failed to object to improper evidence. They also claimed that Patricia's original attorney forgot to give an opening argument. However, that attempt, like her previous ones, failed. She remains at Julia Tutwiler Prison on death row. Rest in peace to Dominiqua Bryant. Tierra Gobble has been on Alabama's death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison since October of 2005. She was originally taken into custody after her son Phoenix was rushed to Southeast Alabama Medical Center in Dothan. Upon his arrival, he had no pulse and was not breathing. Doctors pronounced him deceased shortly afterwards. An autopsy revealed that Phoenix died from blunt force trauma to his head, fracturing his skull. He also had injuries on his face, his head, neck, and chest. His ribs, wrists, and arms were fractured. The tear inside of his mouth was consistent with a bottle having been shoved inside of it. The ER doctor testified that Phoenix would have been in tremendous pain from any of the numerous injuries. Phoenix was born on August 8, 2004 in Plant City, Florida to Tierra Gobble and Samuel Hunter. Within 24 hours of his birth, he was removed from his parents' custody by the Florida Department of Children and Families, who had also removed Tierra's first child, Jewel, from her custody. The children were placed with their uncle Edgar in 2003. At the time of Phoenix's death, Tierra was under a court order to have no contact with either of her children. However, Tierra and her boyfriend were allowed to move in with Edgar and the children in October of 2004, after Tierra signed an affidavit stating that she intended to terminate her parental rights. Just 13 days before Phoenix's death on December 2nd, 2004, proceedings were initiated to terminate Tierra's parental rights. Tori Jordan, who periodically babysat for Tierra's daughter Jewel, would later testify that Tierra said if she couldn't have her children, no one could. Court documents also show that Tierra said that she was Phoenix's primary caretaker, even though Edgar was his guardian. She said that she could have broken Phoenix's ribs from holding him too tightly, and that his head might have struck the side of the crib when she laid him down. Tierra later testified in her own defense. She made claims that Phoenix's dad, Samuel, was abusive. She claimed that in the days before Phoenix's death, she had noticed bruising on him, but was too scared to say anything. During her cross-examination, the state produced a letter written by Tierra in which she wrote, "It's my fault my son died, but I didn't mean for it to happen." Tierra's children were taken due to suspected child abuse. Edgar Parrish, the children's great uncle, had plans to adopt them, and custody was given to him on the grounds that he not remove the children from the state of Florida and not allow their parents any contact with them. Edgar did both. 3 weeks later, Phoenix was dead. The caseworker that was assigned to Phoenix's case lied about claims of trying to contact Tierra, failed to report that Phoenix, his sister Jewel, and Tierra had all disappeared, and he was not able to find them. The caseworker also lied, saying he had seen the children at least once a month. If he'd been making those visits, he would have learned that Tierra and Samuel moved in with Edgar and the children before they all moved to Alabama. That caseworker was fired. Adding to the tragedy, nobody came to claim Phoenix's little body. He was buried by loving strangers of the community who donated clothes and money for a casket and a burial plot. 17 months after Phoenix's burial, Tierra was found guilty of his capital murder. It took less than an hour and a half for the jury to make their decision. The circuit court followed the jury's recommendation by a vote of 10-2 and sentenced her to death. The children's father, Samuel Hunter, pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Sentenced to 10 years, he was released from prison in February of 2009. Edgar Parrish, the great uncle, pleaded guilty to aggravated child abuse and received prison time as well. He was released in November of 2008. Jewel was sent to live with a foster family who later adopted her. There was a lawsuit filed on behalf of Phoenix against Hillsborough kids who placed him with his uncle. $800,000 was awarded in the wrongful death suit. The money was placed in an account after being awarded to Jewel. Unbelievably, the parents that failed Phoenix tried to claim that the money should go to them. On their behalf, motions were filed claiming that the wrongful death suit was unlawful. Claims were made that Tierra and Samuel had not been informed that their son's estate might be entitled to this money, claiming that the Gobble family was not aware that they had the right to serve as the administrators of Phoenix's estate. They were mistaken. According to Alabama's Slayer statute, The law stipulates that since Phoenix's parents were both convicted of crimes that led to his death, they are not entitled to any of the money. They are not permitted to profit from his death, his untimely death, I should say. Rest in peace to Phoenix, Jordan Cody Parrish. In the early morning hours of August 16, 2008, a fire claimed the life of 6-year-old Mason Scott, who died from smoke in his airway and thermal burns, per Dr. Emily Ward. After extinguishing the fire, firefighters searched the house several times before they were able to identify Mason's badly charred body. At the time of the fire, Mason's mother, Christie Scott, and his 4-year-old brother, Noah, were sleeping in Christie's master bedroom while Mason was in the boys' bedroom, alone. Jeremy Scott, Christie's husband, the boys' father, was not at home at the time. Scott's neighbor, Jennifer Davidson, testified that her doorbell rang around 2:30 a.m. on August 16th. She opened the door and found Christie and Noah. Christie told her that her house was on fire. Jennifer went to the back of the house to call 911 because she said the telephone in the front of her home was not working at the time. When she got back to the front door, she said Christie told her that her other son, Mason, was still in the house. Jennifer, the neighbor, called 911 again to inform them that a child was still in the house. After police and firefighters arrived at the scene, Jennifer stayed with Christie. She testified that when Christie was in the ambulance, she said, "Don't call Jeremy. Don't call Jeremy. He'll blame me or he'll try to hurt himself." Jennifer would also testify that she heard Christie ask what fire marshal was at the scene. Christie said she did not like one of the fire marshals because he had worked her other house fire. Jennifer testified that Christie was fully dressed, and at one point, while they were in the ambulance, Christie patted her pant pocket and pulled out a cell phone and said, "I had my cell phone the whole time. I could have called 911. In Christie's statement to the police, she said that after banging on her neighbor's door and handing Noah to her, she told Jennifer that Mason was still inside. She then claimed she ran to the garage doors, entered the code, but the doors wouldn't open. According to Christie, she tried multiple times to gain entry before running to the front of the house, where she said Jennifer's boyfriend grabbed and held her down. The boyfriend denied grabbing or restraining her and said she made no effort to re-enter the house. There were numerous witnesses that testified about Christie's behavior immediately after the fire, which was inconsistent with that of a grieving parent. There was also testimony presented that Christie had been cruel to Mason in public. The last time being on the morning of the fire, when Christie took Mason to school, where she spoke harshly to him and pushed him. Other witnesses testified that Christie had verbally abused Mason and that she had yanked his hair, shoved him, and hit him on the back of the head to make him quiet. Another witness testified that after the fire, Christie told him she did not know how she could be so unlucky, that she had had 3 house fires in 2 years and that God was punishing her for not wanting to raise Mason, an autistic child. The evidence also showed that Christie had obtained 2 life insurance policies on Mason and Noah within months before Mason's death. And on August 15th, 2008, she applied for a 3rd life insurance policy. Christie testified in her own defense, claiming that at about 11 o'clock p.m. on August 15th, she turned off her television and went to check on her sons. Noah was still up, and she had him come to bed with her. At about 2:30 a.m., she said she was awakened when Noah slapped her on the face. She then smelled smoke and tried to get to Mason's bedroom, but was unable to do so because of the thick smoke and intense heat. Further testifying that she dropped Noah out of the window of her bedroom, jumped out herself, and ran to her next door neighbor's house for help. She said that she returned with her neighbor and tried to get back into the house. The jury chose not to believe Christie's accounts of events and convicted her of 3 counts of capital murder. Christie and her defense team presented the testimony of more than 20 family members, friends, and clergy members. The jury recommended by a vote of 7-5 that she be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After weighing all of the circumstances, the court declined to follow the jury's recommendation and sentenced Christie Scott to death, making her the first woman in Franklin County history to ever be sentenced to death. Rest in peace to Mason Scott. Mobile County's first woman sentenced to death, Heather Keaton, has been on death row since August 20th, 2015, for the murder of her stepson and reckless manslaughter in the death of her stepdaughter. In 2008, Heather began a relationship with John DeBlaze. He was married with 2 children at the time while Heather was attending Spring Hill College in Mobile. Early 2009, John separated from his wife. March that year, Heather took a leave of absence from school and began living with John, his parents, and his 2 children, Natalie and Chase. John's mother said issues arose when she once saw Heather discipline the children by putting them in timeout, by duct taping their hands behind their backs and taping their mouths. John's parents kicked Heather out by July of 2009. She moved back to her hometown, Louisville, Kentucky, but returned to Alabama in December. John and the kids then moved out to be with Heather, who was pregnant with John's child. Near the end of January 2010, they moved into the Peach Place Inn in Mobile, where they stayed until being evicted in July. The manager of the inn testified the kids always looked pale and sickly. After their eviction, John and Heather moved to an apartment in Louisville Heather's mother owned. The children were not with them. Heather's mom testified that she'd been told by Heather that the children were staying with John's relatives in Las Vegas until they could get settled somewhere. However, in November of 2010, Heather's mother said she overheard a conversation between the couple that caused her concern. When she confronted Heather, she said that Natalie was dead. A few days later, Heather's mother and her fiance contacted police and requested a welfare check as they believed Heather was being held captive by John. Heather was located and taken to the police department by her parents in Louisville. Heather admitted that both Natalie and Chase had died months ago. According to Heather's account in court records, a few days before she died, Natalie's breath smelled like death, and she puked up some black stuff. Heather claimed she urged John to take Natalie to the hospital, but he refused. One day, while Heather was at school, she said they kept Natalie in a closet for roughly 6 to 8 hours. When Heather finally checked on Natalie, she was not responsive. Later, John put Natalie's body in the car with Heather and Chase, drove out to a wooded area, took Natalie's body, and walked toward the trees. According to Heather, she did not know what happened after that. Chase would meet the same fate. After Heather was arrested for child abuse, Heather later changed some of her statements. When asked why she did not report the children's death, Heather claimed John told her he would kill her. She also claimed John had her phone and had people watching out for her. Heather was incarcerated at the Mobile County Jail. Rosanna Taylor, a woman who allegedly interacted with Heather during her time there, testified that Heather would talk about the children all the time and admitted to feeding them antifreeze. She also said the couple allegedly planned to keep Chase, but when he kept asking where his sissy was in public, Heather called him a liability. She didn't have any remorse, Taylor said. She didn't get sad. It's like she didn't care. She was not human. John was apprehended in Florida and extradited to Mobile a few days after Heather was arrested. In a statement on December 28, 2010, John claimed he choked both of his children to death due to the suffering they were experiencing because of Heather. John said Heather left him no choice and that he was blinded by love. On December 3, 2010, John directed law enforcement officers to the areas where he had buried the children. 5 days later, some of Chase's remains were found, approximately 6 months after his death. Some of Natalie's remains were found on December 11, 2010, and it was approximately 9 months after she died. In July 2012, the remains were exhumed following a proper burial. Dr. Stacy Turner, a medical examiner with the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, performed the autopsies. Heather was found guilty on May 27, 2015. Based on Chase's death, which the jury deemed especially heinous, The jury recommended that Heather be sentenced to death by a vote of 11-1. The court followed the jury's recommendation. John was also convicted for the deaths of his children and sentenced to death. Heather's death sentence was overturned in October of 2020 after a court ruled her rights were violated by not letting her speak at her 2015 sentencing hearing. She was resentenced to death in January of 2021. Before she was resentenced, however, she told the judge she is not a danger to anyone and said she has been devoting her time to Jesus and Bible study. She also said she is a loving friend and family member to her loved ones. She expressed no remorse for the killing of Natalie and Chase. Rest in peace to Natalie and Chase DeBlaze. Lisa Graham has been housed at Tutwiler's death row since February 26, 2016, for hiring a man to kill her daughter. According to court documents, Lisa thought her daughter Stephanie Graham had ruined her life. "If I could kill her myself and get away with it, I would," Lisa said, according to court documents. Stephanie was allegedly using cocaine, stripping, and was recently arrested for her involvement in a drive-by shooting. The Grahams had posted a $100,000 cash bond and hired an attorney for their daughter following that shooting. A few weeks before Stephanie's murder, Lisa offered to pay a neighbor $5,000 to kill her, stating she wanted the little bee dead. Around this time, Lisa was also overheard speaking with Kenneth Walton about how to kill her daughter, how to clean it up, and how easily they could do it. Lisa and Kenneth met at the Columbus Public Library days before Stephanie's body was discovered to once again discuss the murder. There, Lisa gave Kenneth the keys to her car where he retrieved a 9mm handgun. Their final conversation was over the phone on the day of the murder, July 5th, 2007. According to court documents, Kenneth convinced Stephanie to meet him at a racetrack gas station to give her a car to get away with. Upon meeting, Kenneth drove them to Russell County. On the way, Stephanie asked to use the restroom, so Kenneth pulled over in a secluded area on Bowden Road near Pittsview, and Stephanie got out of the truck. While she was outside of the truck, Kenneth shot her twice in the head. He then walked around the vehicle and shot her 4 more times. The following day, Kenneth and Lisa met up. Kenneth returned the gun to Lisa. She gave it to her father, who then cleaned that gun. Kenneth would later confess to Stephanie's murder. He later contacted Lisa to ask her to hire him an attorney and post his bond. Lisa's husband, Kevin Graham, recorded that conversation and turned it over to the police. Lisa was then taken to the sheriff's office for an interview. And prior to that interview, Kevin asked to speak with her. According to the court documents, Lisa said she knew their conversation was being recorded. In the conversation with her husband, Lisa denied having intent to murder Stephanie. She said her remarks about killing her daughter were just joking around. When speaking of Stephanie, Lisa told Kevin, "I told you that child would ruin my life, didn't I?" 5 years would pass by before the case would finally go to trial. On June 14, 2012, Kenneth pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Lisa's trial was set for the following fall. Abruptly, then Circuit Judge George Green declared a mistrial on September 25, 2012, saying that he could no longer preside due to his failing health. When prosecutors pursued a second trial, Lisa's defense team appealed, saying that to try Lisa again would be double jeopardy. However, the Alabama Court of Appeals rejected the double jeopardy arguments on October 17, 2013. Lisa's attorneys then appealed to the Alabama Supreme Court, which turned them down on August 8, 2014. Lisa was convicted by a jury on March 5th of 2014. Judge Jacob Walker III postponed her sentencing so that she could be mentally evaluated. The judge noted that Lisa had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and was taking medications prescribed for schizophrenia. The judge heard testimony from psychologist and attorney Glenn King, who was hired to conduct a pre-sentencing psychological evaluation on Lisa, and testimony from psychiatrist Heather Rowe of East Alabama Mental Health, who said she had been treating Lisa since February of 2013. According to King's testimony, though Lisa had a low IQ of 77, she had no defect that would keep her from understanding the consequences of her actions. According to Rose's testimony, Lisa suffered from recurring and severe depression and had borderline personality disorder. After weighing all circumstances and considering the factors of all testimony, Judge Walker sentenced Lisa to death.
What do you think about what Kevin said up there? I think it was beautiful. I did. What do you want to say to Kevin? Just that you love him, right? Yes. Is there anything else you want to say? No, ma'am. But you felt what he said was beautiful. Yes. He doesn't want to lose you.
No, he won't. He's already lost his sister. I don't want him to lose me too.
Rest in peace to Stephanie Shea Graham.